TCI is brought to you by Spendthrift's emerging top sire Into Mischief, whose top progeny in 2017 includes 3-time Grade 1 winner Practical Joke.
Welcome back to TCI, your inside track to the Breeders' Cup alongside Joel Cunningham. I'm John Siegel. Well, Joel, we don't have any win in your ends this weekend, but it is the first week of the final major preps for the Breeders' Cup. Yes. We'll talk about a few of those races in a minute, but let's recap some races from last weekend. They were winning your ends. Let's start off with the Woodbine Mile. You know, we talked about a horse, World Approval, that we really felt confident was going to run well in here. You know, Mark Cassey picks up Johnny V, a jockey who really knows that Woodbine Mile, knows that surface. Joel, I got to say, this horse was really dominant in this race.
Well, Johnny V, too, is an aggressive front-end rider, really good with tactical horses at getting them to finish up, a strong rider. And we'll go to the race replay now, that Woodbine Mile. We'll see here, based on his draw on the inside, he used that tactical speed to get position. They didn't go real fast in here, but boy, he has a lot of good turn-of-foot Europeans coming at him here, and watch him just separate. I mean, it shows how tremendous his form is. Turning back to a mile, he's in career form. Johnny fits him like a glove. And look, he might not face a better field than this next time he runs in the Breeders' Cup Mile, if indeed he runs next in the Breeders' Cup Mile and rather than the Shadwell at Keeneland. I mean, this was an accomplished European field. I mean, Lancaster Bomber at Group 1 form came over and was getting 12 pounds. He won't get 12 pounds in the Breeders' Cup Mile. Was getting 12 pounds and still couldn't make an impact on him in the stretch. I think this is your favorite for the Breeders' Cup Mile, and I really don't care who Europe brings over. I don't care if they bring over their best milers, which, you know, we talked about last week a little bit, but I think World Approval right now, to me, is going to be the horse to beat at Del Mar around a 2-turn mile.
Well, let's talk about another colt, and this is a 2-year-old, and the Iroquois. It was another win in your end. And Joel, this horse is called the Tabulator. He's now undefeated. Tell me a little bit about this race and what you thought of the performance.
Well, the 3 horses we talked about last week, the 3 colts that we were interested to see stretch out, they ran 1, 2, 3 in here, and the Tabulator won it, and that's why he won it, John. He's on the lead, and they go 3/4 and 112 and 4. We talked about this last week. You don't want to get shuffled back in a field full of 2-year-olds, first time, around 2 turns, early season. They never go fast early. If you're tactical, you're going to win the race. He opens up here and holds on. Hollywood Star had a little bit worse of a trip, being back in mid-pack and having to try to run him down through those slow fraction. And then 10 City, I thought, were terrible tactics for this horse. I mean, he broke sharp from the rail, and they took him back, and he had to navigate through the field and try to finish from way back. I mean, you were never going to catch a horse like the Tabulator. So with that said, I was impressed with all 3 performances. Like, the Tabulator might have won and earned a berth in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, but honestly, all 3 of them ran about the same race, in my opinion. And I bet you if you looked at the Ragas and some of those numbers, I think that would be indicative. All 3 were well clear of the rest of the field. And to me, if I'm taking a horse out of this race, I think 10 City's just as good coming out of this race as the winner, the Tabulator. Those are 3 good up-and-coming colts that are very comparable.
All right, let's move to this weekend. We have a few races to talk about. As I mentioned, these are not win-in-your-end races. But let's start off with the Cotillion. You know, Joel, this is a 3-year-old race. It's a Grade 1, and we see our Oaks winner, Abel Tasman, in here against a horse who's been pretty tough for her, and that's Salty. Tell me, who do you think is going to win this race?
You know, it's a very interesting race between those 2, but they both drew the far outside and one inside of that. I mean, the 11 and 12 post. And I mean, Salty's affiliates had bad luck all year based on her post position, John. I actually like her turning back to a 1:16 mile trip in here. This race is going to be won really on that first run into the far turn, you know, in terms of what position and what tactics are going to be employed. We've seen Abel Tasman gun for the lead at Saratoga with Mike Smith. You know, we thought she was a deep closer. Mike Smith aggressively rode her in that race, and she barely hung on to beat a late that day. Salty obviously was in that race as well. Salty has tactical speed, in my opinion. That, you know, I know she's been further out of it, but I think if they use her a little early here, which I think they have to, I think they have to use both fillies. I'm interested to see who gets the best trip here. I would not be surprised at all if Salty was able to, you know, get a good forward run in that first term and clear. I think she could be tough to catch at a 1:16 mile because I think she's that good at that middle distance. Abel Tasman's no question your prohibitive favorite, the filly to beat in here, and it'll be very interesting. Again, this race, a lot will be told in that first, 16th of a mile or so run into that first turn, John, in terms of which filly gets better position. But I think Salty, if she can outposition Able Tasman somehow, rather than maybe getting hung out wide in that first term, if Mike Smith pushes out of there, I think she can beat Able Tasman at this distance, but be very interesting to see what tactics are employed.
All right, well, let's move now then to the 3-year-old colts, and let's talk about the Pennsylvania Derby. And Joel, I don't remember, I think last year this was a grade 2. Now it looks like it's bumped up to a grade 1.
Yes.
The fields are always great in this race, and we see it again. We see IRAP in here. We see West Coast in here. The viewers may remember West Coast as a horse that looked so good winning the Travers Stakes. Tell me, who do you think is going to win this race?
Horses follow the money. I remember when the Super Derby used to be around this time of year, for a long time back in the 80s and 90s, and had $1 million purse, and it was a grade 1, grade 2 type of race. Horses like Tisnow won it. Well, that race now is the Pennsylvania Derby at Parks. They give away $1 million. The grade is climbed. Now it's a race that all 3-year-olds point for as their final try to run against their own sex, or excuse me, their own age. Yeah, exactly, for the last time before they have to face their elders. So they give away $1 million, and this has become the trendy race towards the end of the year. And now it's a grade 1 because of it. And it's a 3-horse race for me. I mean, you have Timeline breaking from the rail. He's going to have to push out of there and show his speed, in my opinion. You have IRAP, who I think ran a very good race in the Travers. He was 3rd in there, but he was wide into both turns. I think that was a sneaky good race for IRAP. I think he's in great form right now. And West Coast, John, undoubtedly your horse to beat right now for Bob Baffert. I love that he was able to show speed and different tactics last time out. And I tell you, this is where you have to pay attention to the Ragozin sheets and not just your eyeballs. I ignored the Ragozin sheets last time out in the Travers with West Coast. He ran a 1.5 on the sheets when he won the Easy Goer on the Belmont undercard. Now, he beat You're to Blame in there, who's a nobody 3-year-old pretty much. It was not a good field. And so you look and you say, well, he didn't win by like 15 lengths or something. How good of a race was that? He's supposed to beat those type of horses. Same thing when he came back and he ran in the West Coast against grade 3 horses over there.
Right.
Didn't beat good horses, but he had a wide trip. And he won. The margin victory wasn't impressive, but he had a wide trip, and he won. He got a 2-something on the sheets. Those races would make him, if you just go by that Ragozin number, the 1s and 2s, those make you competitive in a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic against older horses.
Wow.
He's unquestionably the fastest 3-year-old of this generation now. And so when you just put his numbers against these horses, he ought to win this race. But if by some chance he gets taken back or shuffled back and Timeline gets away from him or something like that, there could be an upset in here, but those are the 3 in the race that can win it. I'm not even an Irish War Cry fan. It's Timeline, West Coast, and IRAP, and nobody else.
It'll be interesting. I mean, like you said, these races keep morphing and getting better and better horses, better and better grades. I mean, this race could now have championship implications as well as we start seeing these 3-year-olds kind of headed towards that. Let's talk about 3-year-olds again, but this is a prep that will be for the Dirt Mile. Again, it's not a win and you're in. That's the Oklahoma Derby. Yeah. And in this race, we see Battle of Midway, and we also see Gervin. Gervin looks like maybe he's going to try cutting back a little bit. I know he's been facing some of the other horses that were in the Pennsylvania Derby. Tell me, who do you think is going to win this race?
So we're shooting the show, here on Wednesday. They haven't even drawn the race yet. But we know Gervin and Battle of Midway are going to run in there. And there's some other Colonel Dark Temper and some other horses running in there, Untrapped. But look, go back to that Haskell. The 2 horses I liked in there that day were Gervin and Battle of Midway. Now, Battle of Midway is training fantastic, and he ran up the stretch. He did not run well in the Haskell, and I think it surprised connections. He's since come back and won. They're going to ship him again in here. I think without a question, on quality, if I like these 2 horses in the Haskell, and now they're going to the Grade 3 Oklahoma Derby at Remington Park, put a circle around them. One of those 2 horses is going to win. I think they're heads and shoulders above the rest of the group. Gervin and Battle of Midway. I'd even box them in the exacta.
Wow. All right. Well, let's stay with the 3-year-olds and let's go more into the sprint division. Let's talk about the Gallant Bob real quick. Tell me, who do you think is going to win this, and do you think they have a chance to come off of this and have a big performance in the sprint?
Absolutely. I mean, these are the best 3-year-old sprinters in the country. I mean, they're running for what, 300,000 here, so it's straight 3-year-old sprinters, and we've seen this race have an impact. Mind Your Biscuits ran in this race last year. This race has had an impact on the Breeders' Cup Sprint, and particularly looking at this year, John. I mean, Dre Fong's training up to the race. Mind Your Biscuits isn't in the greatest form right now. You start looking at maybe the contenders for the sprint, and maybe it's vulnerable. Maybe an up-and-coming 3-year-old can take advantage in here. Now, the best 3-year-old sprinter in the country, in my opinion, is Mr. Crow, and you're going to see him run next week in the Vosburg at Belmont against older horses, and I think we'll find out what he's made of there. I think he's pretty talented. But Pletcher sends his other one here. Coal Front, who really emerged this summer as a good 3-year-old sprinter from 6 to 7 furlongs. I don't know if I like him turning back here at 6. I don't know if that could be a touch sharp for him. I think American Pastime is actually your horse to beat in here. He's got that California speed. It's classic California speed versus East Coast speed, and I like American Pastime's form. I'm going to give him the edge in here with that California speed. I think he's more of a 6 furlong type horse.
All right, let's talk about 3-year-old sprinters in the filly division, and that's the Gallant Bloom. Tell me, who do you like in here?
Yeah, I mean, this is the older fillies and mares, another race that could have a very big impact on that filly mare sprint. Paula Silverlining, she's had a long campaign. Right now, she's the top filly mare sprinter in the country if you look at her resume. I think we saw a little bit of a chink in the armor last time out, though. She did not run well in her last start. She was a little close to a soft pace. That's not really what she wants to do, and she's had a long campaign. So can she rebound in here? Can Chad Brown get a rebound performance in here to go into the Breeders' Cup Filly Mare Sprint the right way? Big question mark. Her stablemate, Karina Mia, is another filly I'm very interested in, that Breeders' Cup Filly Mare Sprint division. And you'll face a New York bred, Highway Star, in here. Again, they haven't drawn the race, but Highway Star ran very well last time out at Saratoga, John, and I think she can make a good account of herself in here as well.
All right, we have one more race to talk about, and that's the Kelso. It is a prep for the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Before we do jump into that race, though, I know we always like to reveal a TCI top 5. There's so many divisions to talk about going into the Breeders' Cup. Let's give them a TCI top 5 for the Dirt Mile.
Let's do it. Well, this is a little bit tricky, John, because remember, the Dirt Mile every year is usually the horses that don't make the Classic. And yes, I understand Bob Baffert's point and collected the Classic right now. I'm just saying, if they decide to change their mind, Collected, in my opinion, would be your favorite in the Dirt Mile and the horse to beat at Del Mar over a 2-turn mile trip. I would love him in there. Gervin, a little surprised, maybe some people would be surprised to have him in the 2 spot there. I think this 2-turn mile hits him right between the eyes. And again, I like the late developing 3-year-old in this race. I mean, because if you think about it, these older horses are retiring to stud. Their connections are taking shots. They're wanting to run the Breeders' Cup Classic, and even if they get beat, it doesn't hurt their reputation at all. I actually like an emerging 3-year-old that knows he's going to run next year as a 4-year-old anyway. I think you've seen that. I mean, you've seen Gunrunner run in this race. You've seen Tapiture run this race a few years ago and make a good account of himself. I think a late season 3-year-old can run against some of these older horses. We can think of Dortmund and horses like that in the past that were over the top. I can even think of Shackelford. He was a little bit over the top, wasn't good enough to run the Classic, and he was in bad form. And he was a big favorite in this race, and he ran poorly. So I like a 3-year-old in here. So I got Gervin and Pavel, another up-and-coming colt that, again, they could point for the Breeders' Cup Classic with him. He's going to run against older horses next time out in the Awesome Again Stakes. Be interested to see how Pavel runs and whether or not they point for the Classic or the Dirt Mile. More spirit. He's going to train up to the race. Obviously is your favorite right now in that Dirt Mile division, even though, in my opinion, his best race was in the Met Mile around 1 turn. And then Accelerate, John. Again, another local horse. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt, too. He was the horse that beat Arrogate in the San Diego. I think a 2-turn mile, again, is something that Accelerate wants to do. And I think they know with Accelerate, I think they feel like he's not a Breeders' Cup Classic, true top-level horse. So I think the Dirt Mile is an obvious spot for him.
Well, we mentioned the Kelso before you revealed the top 5 there. Yeah. It's interesting. I heard you say it twice, I think, during the top 5 of horses that are going to train up to the Breeders' Cup. We see that with another horse, Practical Joke, who was, thought that maybe he would run in the Kelso, but they decided that now they're going to train up to the race. Without him in this race, who do you think is going to take the Kelso?
Practical Joke's interesting because, again, I think, in my opinion, that's another stallion move. When you start realizing you're probably going to retire the horse and he's going to go to Ashford at the end of the year, what do you got to do with this horse? He's probably not going to like the Classic. You want to run the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, even though this horse has showed you he's not a 2-turn horse. He doesn't have that same punch around 2 turns. They're trying to win a Breeders' Cup race with him. I don't know if maybe the Kelso and Cigar Mile would have been a more prudent move for him because they're 1-turn type miles. I think that fits him a lot better, and they're in his backyard in New York. But they're training up. You're seeing this trend, John. Gunrunner training up. More Spirit training up. Arrogate training up. All these horses now are bypassing that final prep 4 to 5 weeks out because they don't want to go over the top in that race. They don't want to risk a bounce. Trainers would rather play it safe and train up to a top effort, and that's sort of a trend we've seen in racing. This week in the Kelso, you're going to get Sharp Azteca in there as your high weight and your favorite. He's probably going to, they haven't drawn the race, he's probably going to run against 4, 5, 6 other horses based on what I've seen. Pletcher, you know, is going to have a couple in there. And a horse like Seymour Dini, I think is very interesting from Linda Rice off a little layoff. He has a lot of brilliance around a one-turn mile. I think is what he wants. Tommy Macho. If Seymour Dini and Sharp Ass Ticka get a little, you know, wacky up front, and you're looking for that horse that can run down that long Belmont stretch and make an impact late, Tommy Macho might be your horse. You might get Divining Rod in here. So it's a pretty good race, although this is no longer a win and you're in race like it used to be. Thus, you're not going to get many top contenders in here. And I still think there are a lot of horses that, again, if they're 6, 7 furlong type horses, they're pointing for the Vosburg next week.
Right.
If they're 2-turn horses, they're pointing for that Jockey Club Gold Cup. So to me, you see that suffer a little bit with the Kelso this year. The field won't be as good because now it's not a win and you're in.
All right, well, thank you, Joel, and thank you guys for watching. Make sure you come back next week. As we mentioned, there's no win and ends this weekend, but there are some serious races that will affect the Breeders' Cup.